So what happens when your game about a furry space cat with an oversized plumbing tool and his talking lunchbox backpack who saved the universe by blowing up everything in their path becomes a massive hit? You make another one, of course! Ratchet and Clank was a pretty decent game, especially for the first in the series. The platforming was solid, but the combat has aged quite a bit. It laid a great foundation, but there is room for improvement and polish. Regardless of my problems with the game now, it was a massive success, and so a sequel was greenlit and launched literally 1 year after the first, Ratchet and Clank Going Commando. Or Locked and Loaded depending on your region. Going Commando! What other game has the main character playing their own original game and the game they're currently in on the title screen? Yeah, I'm already sold. Going Commando means a lot to me, actually. I wasn't a fan of the first game when I was young, but Going Commando and Up Your Arsenal were my childhood. They were some of my earliest memories I have with video games in general, and have been some of my favorite games of all time for most of my life. So I may have a bit of nostalgic bias going into this. Regardless, I can still go into this with a critical eye and give a fair analysis. And with the advent of a new Ratchet and Clank game being announced, yes! I see no better time to continue the Ratchet and Clank Marathon by continuing with Going Commando. After the events of the first game, we join our heroes in a pseudo-retirement during some kind of an interview. Ratchet and Clank miss the hero business, but there's no galactic threats for them to put an end to anymore. Poor souls. But coincidentally for them, the CEO of a weapons manufacturer in the Bogon Galaxy, Abercrombie Fizzwidget, happens to see this and hires their help by actually straight up abducting them against their will. Fizzwidget offers Ratchet and Clank a job at Megacorp in exchange for tracking down a thief who stole an experiment from them and getting it back. And yeah, that's the basic plot. Wow, I mean, there is way more to it than that, and I'll get into it, but yeah, that's the basic premise. A thief stole an experimental creature, hunt them down, get it back. The premise is definitely on the simplistic side, but it still fits with the series tone. It works fine enough, I guess. But you know what? It really doesn't matter. Ratchet and Clank games never have a focus on the story. Ha! What matters are the characters and humor. Yeah, it's good. Ratchet is not only voiced by James Arnold Taylor this time and will continue to for the next 11 games, but I feel they made him and Clank both more entertaining and likable this time around. It really feels like they solidified their dynamic, and there's quite a few funny moments with them.
It says, in case of emergency, break glass with wrench. Hold on. This one says, use rock to break glass to get wrench to break glass to get rock. Ooh, I love logic puzzles. Let's see. If you break the glass with the...
Solved it.
In fact, I feel they got the writing down much more in general. They definitely began to step more into the satire, cynicism, comical violence, jabs at commercialism, and slight edge the series is known for.
Okay, Clank, don't move. I'm coming down. Whoa! Ugh. Son of a quark!
Our highly trained experts spend their day creating the latest in heavy-duty weaponry to protect you and your whole family.
When we first arrived, we found a planet completely overrun by rainforest. To better accommodate the local wildlife, we transformed this impassable jungle into an easily navigable desert.
All right, just what the is going on?
For better or for worse. Let's not forget some of the other characters. I will never get tired of Fizzwidget's inability to speak properly. He just makes up his own vocabulary and everyone just rolls with it like he spoke normally, and it never ceases to make me chuckle. It's phantasmic, absolutely incredulous.
I'm sorry to incapacitate you, but our entire galaxy is in a very precocious situation. I must humbly request your sustenance on a mission of dire urgitude, a mission of superfluous peril, a mission of unequivocal imperitude.
Did that make any sense?
The thief hires a group of mercenaries for hire called Thugs for Less, which that already is great on its own, but the Thug's leader is probably one of the more entertaining characters in this game. He's not in the slightest threatening to be a main villain, but provides many entertaining scenes because he's a bumbling moron. He's the perfect side villain.
So you two hit the road and don't bother trying to find me, cause I got wind. I'm like the wind. You never know where I might show up next. And I blow hard, and I can be cooling on a warm summer day.
Unfortunately, the rest of the side characters don't really leave as much as an impact compared to the first game, however. And then we have the thief who... well, I'll get to that when I get to it. Rather than expanding on Ratchet's moveset from the previous game, Insomniac instead focused on keeping it the same and polishing it, but overhauling the weapon system instead. One of the first things you'll notice in Going Commando is simply how well Ratchet controls now. Ratchet is so much less stiff and is way more acrobatic. Gliding especially is less stiff. He feels way better to control. I can't tell you how many quality of life improvements they've made. For starters, the game pauses whenever you bring up the weapon wheel, allowing you to change weapons without getting shot. That's extremely handy. You don't have to select every individual piece of ammo you want to purchase, thank God. Grav ramps no longer cause you to walk at a snail's pace, and you can actually jump now. Sure, logically it doesn't make any sense, but I'll take better gameplay over realism. The health system has been changed dramatically from its early platformer system. You know, Ratchet dies in 4 hits, the enemies on average taking 2 to 3 hits kinda deal. That's been replaced with genuine health bars now. And Ratchet can it be? Is it true? An actual lock strafe? Okay, this function alone automatically makes this game 5 times better than the first one. The first Ratchet was somewhat built around its weapon system. Now you can actually avoid getting shot and still shoot things accurately at the same time. It seems like such a small addition, but it makes all the difference. And of course, one of my favorite additions, what they did with challenge mode. They took challenge mode from the first game and made it genuinely one of my favorite new game pluses in any video game ever. Yeah, you start over with all your weapons, bolts, and the enemies are way harder and extremely deadly. But now there's also the bolt multiplier. The more enemies you defeat, the higher the multiplier goes, giving you tons of bolts. However, the drawback is getting hit even once reduces it back to 1. So if you want to keep your pockets loaded, don't get shot. Observant viewers may have also noticed I'm playing the game on the standard armor set, even in challenge mode. I thought it would be fun to challenge myself throughout the series by playing on the hardest difficulty if it has one, and not purchasing any armor. And I can definitely confirm that if you want extra challenge, do no armor runs, they're a blast. Enemies absolutely obliterate you if you get hit, often killing you only 2 hits. And Going Commando in particular is already a pretty challenging game at points as is, so no armor will definitely... Oh, I died. Well, you know what they say. If you can't solve a problem with heavy weaponry, then you're not using enough. Insomniac practically nailed the entire weapon system and easily created one of the best arsenals in the entire series on their second try. On top of being just much better in general, weapons now gain experience through use, and once maxed out, upgrade into a completely new, extremely powerful version of that weapon. While not perfected just yet, this addition is one of the best things they added to the series because it actually gives you a reason to constantly use different weapons and rewards you for it greatly. And again, I wasn't lying when I said this is one of the best arsenals in the series. There's some of the more standard but still fun to use ones like the Heavy Lancer, Mini Nuke, Blitz Cannon, Mega Turret Glove. But then you have the really good ones like the Seeker Gun, the Mega Rocket Cannon, the Shield Charger, and some of my favorites like the Lava Gun, which I don't have footage of because when it upgrades to the Meteor Gun it completely ruins it. The Plasma Coil's alright, but once it upgrades into the Plasma Storm, say goodbye to that pesky problem called aiming. Shoot a couple of these floating spheres of death and everything in that general direction dies. And then we have the big one. Arguably one of the best and most iconic weapons in the series, the Bouncer. While its abysmal fire rate kinda prevents me from saying it's the best, come on, it's the Bouncer. It's hard to get better than this. Oh yeah, I'm legally obligated to mention how amazing the Rhino 2 is. Most of the more core gadgets from the first game return, becoming series staple from here. The Helipack, Thruster Pack, Hydro Pack, Swing Shot, Magna Boots, and Grind Boots. And as for the new ones, I love the Charge Boots. On paper, the Charge Boots seem very impractical due to how heavy they are in momentum, but once you get used to them, you can pull off some crazy stuff. Oh, and the Box Breaker is simply the greatest thing ever. Hyper striking the ground causes every single breakable object to shatter and shower you with bolts. This is it. This is single-handedly the most satisfying thing in any video game ever. You cannot top this. As for the situational gadgets, they're alright. I thought the Dynamo, Therminator, and Tractor Beam, while very situational, weren't that bad. However, a lot of the other ones don't feel very fleshed out. The glider and the hover pack never felt genuine to me. It felt like any section that used them were added because they needed to use them, not because they had a great idea that revolved around them. Especially the hover pack. The Hypnomatic and Infiltrator are even worse. Regardless of some of the gadgets not being very fleshed out, overall I still prefer the gadgets in this game to the first, and they're not that bad. While I've always greatly preferred Going Commando, the first game nailed its level design and world building, and I'll be the first to admit, it might just have slightly better worlds than Going Commando at times. However, that doesn't change the fact that Going Commando still has some great level design, even if the game is much more combat focused this time around. Maktar Resort, Joba, Todana, Bolden, and a bunch of others. The original has arguably more iconic locations, but the improved gameplay and controls balance them out to be pretty much equal in my opinion. Except for one level, which... you'll see. You know what? This game looks really good for a PS2 game and holds up really well. Overall, the colors look brighter and more saturated than the first, the character models in general look cleaner, and Ratchet's actual design looks so much better. And in the PS3, we have wrenches that get stuck in the side of the screen, NPCs who are secretly giants, and floating helmets. You will never unsee this now, you're welcome. Looking at the Clank levels in the first game, God these suck! But in Going Commando, God these suck! Less. Clank levels are so much more tolerable this time around. But they're still not good. Clank no longer moves like he's swimming through molasses, and gadget bots automatically return to you after being destroyed. But still, they're no longer unbearable this time around, and only last for like 5 minutes, so it's not like there's any real harm done. They're definitely improved, but poor Clank always gets the short end of the stick. But that doesn't excuse the giant Clank sections. God, these suck! All you do is chase down a boss for minutes on end, barely doing any damage, while you take tons of damage very easily, and it's a complete chore. The second one is technically optional, but it unlocks the armor magnetizer, so why wouldn't you go for it? And the UFO boss is even worse than the previous one, and basically impossible to actually get attacks in. Ugh, these are dreadful! But the Thug Leader gets bonus points for hitting the ground, exploding, and somehow surviving, so kudos to him. I couldn't do that. So yeah, Going Commando holds up really well. Sure, there's a couple of minor problems here and there, but overall, it's still the perfect sequel I remember, right? Right? As much as I hate to say it, yeah, it's not as flawless as I remember. As much as I love Going Commando to pieces, I have to address some of the pretty major critical flaws it does have. I already mentioned the awful giant Clank levels, but there's more to it than that. You know what, I'll throw in a spoiler warning here just in case, as I will be discussing the whole plot and final boss. So here's your warning. After retrieving the experiment back from the thief, it turns out the thief was actually a female Lombax named Angela Cross, and that the experiment they handed to Fizzwidget is actually a bloodthirsty monster that Megacorp intends to sell as pets across the galaxy. Except she explains this in the worst way possible, as in she doesn't actually tell them they just doomed the galaxy, and instead leaves them to figure it out on their own. A bunch of stuff happens and they sneak into the distribution facility to put an end to the protopet, but it turns out Fizzwidget was actually Captain Quark this whole time, who impersonated the CEO by locking him in the supply closet. Okay. Who purposely unleashed the ravenous protopets across the galaxy so that he can save everyone and take the credit as the hero of Bogon, which makes absolutely no sense how an imbecile like Quark pulled this off. Alright, here's the thing. I don't mind the actual premise of the plot. It's delightfully nonsensical, and I think it fits well with the tone of the series. However, it has no focus. The first game, for as simple as it was, had a clear main focus, which was stopping Drek. But in Going Commando, who's even the main threat we should be worrying about? In the beginning, it's the thief. Wait, what did they name her? What? They didn't even give her a name? It's just Thief? And can't forget about the Thugs for Less. Then the biggest concern is the dangerous protopet. And the Thug Leader has a hit on your head because of Fizzwidget. Wait, don't tell me. It's just Thug Leader, isn't it? Oh, for crying out loud. Then, when the protopets are eating the whole galaxy, it turns out Quark was pretending to be Fizzwidget the whole time, which barely makes any sense. You see my problem here? Thief, Thugs, Protopet, Thugs, Fizzwidget, Protopet, Fizzwidget, Quark. There's no focus. It's a mess. You never know who you're supposed to be looking out for, and I still don't even know who's considered the main villain of this game. It's arguably Quark, but they don't even reveal him until the last 5 minutes of the game. But the Protopets themselves are actually the biggest threat. In fact, the final boss is just a giant mutated Protopet. Actually, let's go ahead and talk about the final boss while we're at it. It sucks! Many bosses in this game go down way too easily anyway, but the final boss is especially underwhelming. I gave Chairman Drek a lot of hate in my last video for being too hard and taking way too long to kill, but the King Protopet has the exact opposite problem. It's completely pathetic. At least with Drek, even though he's a frustrating bullet sponge, he at least felt climactic and like a final boss. The King Protopet is not only underwhelming, but can be taken out with just one weapon without getting hit in about 40 seconds. I honestly think I prefer Drek despite him being more frustrating to fight. But no, this is not the worst boss in the game. You want to know what it would be like if Constipation were reincarnated as a video game level? Well, that would be Atlantica in Kingdom Hearts 1. And then a close second would be Snivelak. This planet is one of the most unfair difficulty spikes I've experienced in a platformer, and nothing else in the game comes close to its level of difficulty after. The whole planet is crawling with tons of some of the strongest enemies in the game that can kill you very quickly, attack helicopters that you can't hit without a lock-on mod due to a glitch, and nanotech boxes that activate force field traps, followed by more helicopters and thugs. This all alone is bad enough, and you will likely die multiple times trying to get past it. But no. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to one of the worst bosses I have ever fought in my life. If you think Drek is a bullet sponge, you haven't seen this soul-drainingly tedious 10-minute long turret section of a boss. Have you ever spent time fighting this abomination? It's surprisingly boring! Oh, I can't do Dr. Nefarious. All you do is get in a turret, shoot him, swivel back and forth to fire the bombs he shoots non-stop, shoot him as he walks back and forth, keep doing this until he gets tired of walking in one spot and decides to destroy your turret, go find a new turret, and repeat this process for an unbearably long time. Does this not sound fun to you? It's not particularly hard or anything, but it's still possible to make a few lapses in judgment and accidentally die during it, which starts the dreadful 10 minutes all over again. In fact, I actually recommend finding a corner of a building and constantly doing nothing but side flips and firing every weapon you have at him instead of the intended method. Sure, it's still tedious and takes forever, but this method only takes 8 minutes instead of 10 and is less painful than the intended way. God, this fight is awful! This whole planet sucks! Sorry about that. Needed to get that out. This is purely just speculation on my part, but I'm certain the developers were rushed during the process of making this since it only came out 1 year after the original. It's apparent in a lot of areas they had many ideas they wanted to take with this game, but didn't have time to fully flesh it out or polish it. Some of the gadgets, the flying levels, the awful giant Clank sections, they felt like they were still in their experimental phase and didn't have time to fully realize them. The plot is pretty weak and unfocused, the ending is kind of underwhelming, and characters like Angela are completely wasted. She's not very fleshed out, and then she's completely retconned in the next game, never to even be mentioned again. The game can have some unbalanced difficulty spikes, and of course the bosses can range from pathetic to whoever made this deserves to be fired. But despite all this, Going Commando is still fantastic. Yes, I know I just spent a long time complaining, but for everything the game gets wrong, it gets two things right. The improvements they made to the core game completely outweigh any negatives by a landslide. The pure gameplay itself, they knocked it clean out of the park. This game is so much fun to play, the combat's probably one of the best you'll ever get in a platformer, and the weapons are incredible. Going Commando didn't just drastically improve the core game from the first, it set the standards for the other games to strive for, and very few have surpassed it in my opinion. While the level design isn't drastically better than the first game, in fact I'd give a slight advantage to the original, I still consider the level design on par, especially with the improved controls overall. The writing is on point, visually the game looks great for its time, the music is really solid, and so many quality of life changes were made that I can't see the series without. This is just a fantastic game overall. But of course, I can't mention this game without bringing up the single coolest secret in any video game ever. So by jumping off the rail here and heading to this specific building, and either heading here at a certain time, or the easiest method of literally just walking to the left and clipping beneath the floor, you're granted access to the Insomniac Museum. This museum is filled with all kinds of scrap content, testing tools, programming demos, and all explained by the devs themselves in a building shaped like their office. It's so cool, and I'm not going to share much just so you can experience most of it yourself. Coolest secret ever. Going Commando is not a perfect sequel, but man is it an excellent one. I mean, I will admit, it was disappointing to return to a game I cherished so much to notice some of the glaring problems it does have, and I definitely think more development time could have done it wonders, and Snivelak should have never left the testing room. But still, as is, it's still an excellent game. Accuse me of nostalgia if you want, but this is still and will probably always be not just one of my favorite 3D platformers, but one of my favorite games of all time, and easily a top 3 Ratchet and Clank game, and no critical eye will ever take that from me.
Sorry.
I easily give the game the rating of great. Do I recommend the game? Absolutely! If you are a fan of PS2 era games and somehow haven't played it, what is wrong with you? Go change that right now! However, this does concern me. If after all this time Going Commando had way more flaws than I remember, will Up Your Arsenal suffer the same fate? Nah, I'm just messing with you. The game is fantastic. Man, this holds up so well.